Hello and welcome to another episode of Artistry of Code Snippets. I'm Grzegorz, and in today's episode I want to quickly talk about a little mantra which helped me to push forward my personal and professional development. We both know that in the IT industry we cannot allow ourselves to stagnate. Thus, having some guidelines for personal and professional development is always useful. Learn, apply, repeat. These three words have more depth behind them, as one may initially think. This snippet is just a quick walk through the subject, and if you're interested in more details, I've elaborated about this in my article, which is linked in the description of the episode. So let's start right away. The learn part. Well, I think that most of you guys already figured out where to get your knowledge from. Most of the time I'm getting my sources of knowledge from recommendations, like it's 99% of what I'm reading, listening to, and watching. Assuming you have a good source of the knowledge which you decided to learn, then you're ready to go. Aside of picking the knowledge source, I wanted to highlight two important aspects. Jamie Smart, in his book titled The Little Book of Clarity, elaborates on the power of insight. So he depicts it by comparing two ways of reading, like reading for information and reading for insight. And once I read that, it strongly influenced the way I approach reading and learning in general. So just to paraphrase what he said, when we are reading for information, there's a lot of bias involved. So we judge the things which we read. We're trying to compare this to what we know so far. Do we agree or disagree with it, etc. So by consequence, our mind seems to be somewhat closed, and the learning process is not as effective as it possibly can be. While we read for insight, we intentionally put away the known. So we are freed from any prejudice, any expectations and bias. And with our minds wide open, we can allow ourselves to be influenced and inspired by what we are reading. So this way, the learning experience will be more rich and the whole learning process more effective. Whenever I'm even reading a technical book, and for sure when I'm reading a soft skill related book or a business related book, I'm always trying to read for the insight. I don't have a set expectation about what's going to happen once I fully read this. I'm reading this with the intent to get inspired, because when I get inspired, it's going to stick with me for longer. The other important point which I wanted to bring is that you have to control the pace. So while running, you can control the pace by regulating the stride length, so how big is your step, and the cadence, so how many steps you take in a single minute. And I think that with learning, it's the very same. It doesn't make a lot of sense to get that thick book, read like the half of it, like 200 pages out of 400, and then say, okay, now I'm going to apply this. By the time you got to the page number 200, you probably already lost the plot. What you can do instead is that you can recognize what's your natural pace, what's your natural stride length, what's your natural cadence, and then use this as a way to measure the chunks of the knowledge. So for an instance, once upon a time I was reading a book about functional programming and JavaScript. So while being familiar with JavaScript and object-oriented programming, I was very little knowledgeable about concepts from functional programming itself. That's why after each chapter of the book, I've created an exercise for myself in which I could quickly apply what I've just learned, even though I was at the very beginning of the book. And you know, sometimes the books, they have those examples at the end, or the exercises at the end. When it's not the case, you can always figure it out on your own. So do I want to attempt applying this chapter by chapter, or perhaps there's a very difficult section and now I need to take a small break. About applying. Without applying the knowledge, the learning cycle cannot be really completed. So only once we attempt to apply what we've just learned, we'll gain a precious experience and feedback. So as a result, we gain a better understanding of the thing which we are learning. Mere fact of exercising what we've learned grounds the knowledge even more. We discover when it's applicable and when it's not. Even in the case of failed attempt, we can retrospectively figure out what could have been done better. So that would lead us to even learning more. So depending on what you're trying to improve, your technical skills or soft skills, you are always having a number of ways you could apply what you're learning. Surprisingly enough, most of these can be done in both private and professional spheres of your life. But be mindful, safety first. So the common recommendation which I drew over the years from many business-related books is that everyone encourages you to implement what you learn in your personal life before you move to the professional level. That's the way I'm always doing it. Learning negotiations? Try to negotiate that. Dad, I want to watch another episode of Paw Patrol with your 4-year-old. Learning how to deal with verbally aggressive coworkers? Agree with your best friend that he's gonna play the difficult one from time to time so that you can practice your polite Aikido-style responses. Learning a new programming paradigm? Build yourself a sandbox project where you can exercise everything you want to learn. So, successful learning and progress can happen only within an environment which accepts failure and considers it to be the part of a process. So once you know how the thing which you've learned works, you can start to professionalize it by applying it in your day-to-day work in a mindful way, still learning from the mistakes which can and will happen. And sometimes applying requires you to look for opportunities and even to create them. When it comes to looking for an opportunity with your employer, you could work out a setup in which you can spend part-time playing with the new programming language at work if the company has a policy for that, and obviously if it will benefit the company in any way. Or you might be allowed to run a pilot project, like a proof of concept, so that the company can verify if it is going to fit anyhow. The option which you always have is to create an opportunity yourself. I found it quite common that developers have their side projects next to the main job. And I'm not thinking about side projects for other customers, employers, and even not thinking about the financial benefits from those projects. They are more like a playground where you can exercise what you've learned. Always be on the lookout for options. Sometimes the opportunity is just next to us, but for some reason we don't see it in the first place. So being open-minded and creative here is very important. Sometimes you need to unlearn something first. Through your work experience, you've built a lot of habits, ways of thinking and working which did the job for you, so that you ended up in the place where you are right now. It might be the case that making progress will require letting something else go in order to really move forward. To give you an example, thanks to the Pragmatic Programmer by Mr. Hunt and Thomas, I learned that having a ready solution proposal whenever a problem arises is something that's valuable. As a consequence, I used to always be the first guy who was putting down the solution on the table whenever the project was facing any difficulties. And I must say, it did the job for me and got me into a technical leader role quite fast. But then something strange happened. As I decided to develop my leadership skills, I learned that my attitude to be the first one making the solution proposal was no longer desired, as it could, and definitely was, taking professional development space from my team's members. This then required me to unlearn the old behavior, habit, or way of working, as it only was getting into my way and blocking my progress. And the last part, it's repeat. So here it is, the simplest of all the steps, and we're done, right? Well, I bet you wish so. Before I repeat the cycle, I want to be sure that I really finish the previous one. So like in start finishing, finish starting. The worst situation you can get yourself into is learning 20 things at once, which, as you might expect, leads to not the best outcomes. It's very easy to run into this problem if you prematurely jump to the next iteration. Our cognitive capacity is limited, so is our ability to learn and focus. Give yourself time and ask yourself a question: am I done with this bit already before I can move to the new one? That's all for today. Thanks for listening, and if you think that this message is worth sharing with your friends and coworkers, please do so without hesitation. Stay safe and have a great week. Bye bye.